On today's Sports Slate, we talk about the latest news about the NCAA and college football with Nick Bromberg, Yahoo Sports writer. Let's get it.
The Sports Slate presented by Wildcat 91.9.
Going, and as long as we're responsible, and I don't see why we can't start football on time and hopefully have fans in the stands.
And it's so after somebody's killed 3 zombies, I mean, it's all the same to me.
As a result, you're saying the hell with it. I'm a responsible adult.
I will tell you this, that there is no secret sauce.
Welcome to the Sports Slate on a nice summer day in Kansas in June. It's getting a little hot here, and I like it that way. I'm your host, Logan Mance, and I've covered junior college football and Kansas State football, but now I wanted to do a podcast talking about college football, and I think the right guy to talk with is Nick Bromberg from Yahoo Sports. He knows just about everything inside and out, and without further ado, let's get to the interview. Here it is. I would like to welcome in Nick Bromberg, a Yahoo Sports writer for college football and NASCAR. And how you been doing, Nick, throughout all these tough times in this world?
Good, playing golf a lot to try to keep some semblance of normalcy. So probably playing too much golf, but at the same time, it's good to get out of the house right now.
Yeah, I've been playing a lot of golf myself, so that's a good way to pass time. But anyways, big news coming forward at NBA today. They will continue play, and I realize it's a different sport than college football, and the players get paid. But is it getting more evident that college football will play this fall?
Yeah, I think we're going to play no matter what. And I say we, I should be saying we because I'm not involved in the decision making or will actually be playing. But there's going to be a season. I still think we have to figure out though what that season's going to look like. And anybody who says they really know what it's going to look like is lying because they don't. And I think Lincoln Riley is the guy who I think has been the most pragmatic about this. All things considered, Oklahoma they made the decision, he said about a month ago, that they were going to come back on July 1. And they're doing that because that's about the latest that they feel that they can come back and still get the players ready for the season. And so, we have, SEC schools starting June 8th, Big 12 starts June 15th, and then, conferences like the ACC and the Big 10, the start dates are basically determined by the schools. But, it's going to be a matter of, and as we're seeing right now over this next week or so, it's inevitable that players are going to test positive. Oklahoma State said they had 3 athletes. Iowa State said they had 4. Marshall's had 3. Ole Miss, I think, just came out Wednesday afternoon, said they had 2 athletes. So, it's players are going to keep testing positive, and it's going to be up to these schools now to control the outbreaks as best as they can, quarantine players, and then, try to keep this going and basically execute their social distancing plans, for lack of a better term, throughout the entirety of the summer. And then when we see where we are when week 1 hits on September 5th.
Yeah, I think it's kind of crazy how Gundy wanted his players back as soon as possible, and Lincoln Riley kind of took the different approach. So they kind of like different opinions in Oklahoma, and it just happened that Oklahoma State had a player test positive.
Yeah, that's the it was one of those situations where you look at Mike Gundy's comments a while back, especially, and just completely independent of the tone deaf, run money through the state of Oklahoma comment. And just simply talking about, the players, how he said the players are healthy, that they can probably get through it. Well, yeah, but, the whole thing we've learned throughout this entire thing is it's not so much personal risk involved. We all have to worry about our own personal risk in this, but it's our risk to others, given how many cases are asymptomatic. And we're also seeing from what schools are telling us, and obviously we're not getting much information right now as players come back to campus for obvious HIPAA reasons, and so we're not really going to find out much about specific coronavirus cases unless players themselves come out and talk about it. But for the most part, schools have been saying, hey, players asymptomatic, we're quarantining them, et cetera, et cetera. There's been a lot of asymptomatic cases, and we're going to see that going forward. But that's, and we don't need to go down this road because it's been gone down thousands upon thousands of times. It's just a matter of the fact that this is such a virus that you may have and you don't know you have it until you actually test positive for it. That's the scary thing about this, because I simply don't know. You can social distance workouts. you can open a weight room from 8 to 8 and divide it up for hour increments, 90-minute increments for quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, defensive linemen, linebackers, defensive backs, et cetera, and then clean it every time for the next position group so the offensive line can come in. You really can't social distance on a football practice field. Yeah, you can do individual drills and put the linemen on one part of the field and then skill position players on the other part of the field. You can do that and even separate the running backs and the wide receivers. But when you're playing 11 on 11 drills and you have to have 11 on 11 drills to get ready for a football season, that's when things get tricky. And that's when teams really have to hope that there is not one infection on the team of a guy who's going to get a lot of playing time in an 11 on 11 practice situation, because that's when really things could potentially start to mushroom.
Yeah, Bob Bowlesby, the Big 12 commissioner, had some comments, and I want to ask for your opinion on this. To test the players multiple times a week, and is that taken away from tests from just an everyday person? How do you think that could work out? And just the getting players tested, that's going to be like millions on millions of tests. Probably not probably around millions, but probably not millions on millions. But there's going to be a lot of tests. Is my point.
Exactly. It's a lot of tests, and this is the both the financial and the political side of things. The political side of things, obviously, is we're still in the United States not the testing capacity where we would need to be in order to really know who has and who doesn't have it and be able to contact trace and isolate people. And, because, you or I probably couldn't go get a test right now because we're not showing symptoms. A school can procure those tests if it wanted to. But then there's the question of, are we going to be diluting a supply that came from somebody else, that somebody else who really could need it has it? And, this is especially, and that's on a case-by-case basis, quite frankly, because you have some states that are doing pretty well when it comes to this right now in terms of their case levels. And then you have certain states that are still, spiking and infection rates are growing. And secondly, it's the financial aspect of it. Even if you are a school that you think that you can go safely get tests and keep a bunch available for the general population, is those tests aren't going to be cheap. And you need to test frequently to really be on top of things. And, if you're testing just 85 scholarship players 3 times a week, that's 255 tests. Then you also have to test the staffers. You have to test the graduate assistants. You have to test, all the managers, everybody involved in a football program. You can see how this exponentially grows. And so that's why I think you're seeing with a lot of the plans that college teams have lined out here, they heavily involve a lot of social distancing and a lot of proactive measures. And the NBA and other professional sports leagues are doing that too. But the professional sports leagues are in a position they're going to be able to test their athletes, I think, a lot more often than colleges will be, simply because you're looking at schools that already are operating with less athletic revenue because of the cancellation of the NCAA tournaments. We went from $600 million in revenue to $225 because of the insurance payment and the cancellation of the tournament. And then you also, athletic departments largely are nonprofits, and then if they don't run a budget surplus, they are subsidized by the school. Justifying donors to say, hey, look, we need to use your athletic money for coronavirus tests, especially when you're already on the precipice of potentially cutting sports at a lot of schools. That's the sticky situation, is you have to figure out, as an athletic director, and I don't envy this at all. They are just having to basically make decisions on the fly, like pretty much everyone else is in this situation, of figuring out what is the most efficient way to minimize risk. I think that's the best way to sum it up here for an athletic department, is how can you minimize risk on the most financially efficient scale that you can, because we're obviously dealing with some pretty tenuous budgets across the country here.
Yeah, and they're going to start out voluntary practices. And I was talking to a Division II football player today, and I was like, so what if you don't show up to these voluntary practices? And he said, he could lose maybe playing time or, maybe a scholarship, probably not. But anyways, like college, they don't have a players union like pro sports do. And do you see where college sports could be exploiting their college athletes?
This is a tricky situation, and I think we're going to see a lot, especially this is something that I think is maybe different 5-10 years ago, but as we are fully in the midst of, I think, a sea change player rights movement here, and I still realize that there's a long way to go. But just the simple fact that you have the NCAA taking the steps that it is to potentially allow players to get money for their name and image and rights and get third party endorsement money in the next season. And that's a really, really big deal. So I think schools are going to be very cognizant of the fact that workouts are voluntary. Iowa AD Gary Barta came out and said, hey, look, no one is going to lose their scholarship if they have any concerns about playing because of the coronavirus. And I think schools everywhere would be wise to take that plan of attack, especially publicly. I mean, even more especially privately, but publicly they're going to take that line because you don't want to be the school that punishes a player who may, for absolutely legitimate reasons, feel like he or she cannot participate in sports this year because of the consequences of the elevated risk of a coronavirus infection. And I think everybody understands that. But, you throw it on the flip side, and it's the inherent pressure that a player would want to feel. I think we don't understand sometimes the pressure that these kids face. And, if we talk about voluntary workouts, well, they're voluntary in the sense of you're kind of expected to be there. And, it's voluntary because a coach isn't there, and therefore it's not a, quote, countable athletic activity. But, it's one day you're in the weight room with your teammates, you're potentially getting better, and, teams take notice of that, and kids realize that. And while a coaching staff and an athletic department staff may realize, hey, look, we understand why a kid isn't potentially coming back until the middle of July or not right at the first day the weight room opens. That being said, you can totally understand why an athlete would feel like he or she has to be pressured to be back on campus and in the gym the first day it's open.
Is the NCAA feeling pressure about the third-party paying of players, sending it to the federal court and kind of moving slow on that issue? Do you see a situation where that may not happen, where players get third-party payments?
Never say never. I think it's going to happen, but it's also not official. So we also, it's one of those situations where it seems inevitable, but at the same time, it's not set in stone yet. And quite frankly, there is a ton that has to be worked out. I mean, the NCAA's plans, when they were announced earlier this spring, just had a ton of, hey, we got to figure this out. Hey, we got to figure this out. And it's been very clear throughout all of this, and it's especially clear now with the Power Five conferences' letter to Congress, that the NCAA and college athletics leaders want the federal government to take the leading role on this because it shields them from having to basically take some of the responsibility, quite frankly. If they can get the federal government to take up this cause, then they have a federal law that they can point to and say, hey, look, it's a federal law, it's not us. And secondly, it's the fact that, you had these states like California, Florida, and then other states were following suit with the state laws that allowed players to get paid and make endorsement income. And I think none of us really knew just how those state laws could be enforced because they would be in conflict with NCAA laws. And so does a state law, how do you enforce a state law over an NCAA law? And, sure, a player in California could start getting paid and make endorsement income, but then the NCAA theoretically could still say, hey, look, well, yeah, you're still running afoul of NCAA rules, so you're ineligible. And so it's just an absolute mess. And so NCAA schools clearly want one set of rules from the federal government. And, they are looking for guidance. It's like, hey, look, can you do the dirty work for us? And In normal times, I think this is maybe a little bit more sure than it is now, simply because we have so much on the plate of 2020 with everything
Right.
that's gone on in our country. And so maybe if we're not dealing with a pandemic and protests over systemic racism and police and injustice and things like that, maybe this has a better chance of getting going. Because quite frankly, when you look at the priorities in our society of things that we want our government's leaders to address, while to those of us in the college sports bubble, a federal law governing the way that athletes can get paid is kind of a big deal. But in the grand scheme of things, there's far bigger things out there.
Yeah, and another thing the NCAA is trying to do is trying to enact the one-time immediate transfer rule. I don't know about your opinion, but how do you feel about a player being able to transfer and being immediately on the program?
Absolutely. I think let them transfer once, and then you can figure out how you go from there. But I think I think it was a fair and equitable solution. Not necessarily the perfect solution, but absolutely a fair and equitable one to give kids the opportunity to transfer one time without penalty if you met for certain requirements. Even if those requirements are simply just a bare minimum standard of being up to date in your classes, you're an athlete in good standing, you haven't gotten in trouble. I think that's totally fair. Um, and also, too, quite frankly, I think you just have to simply look at it too. No one has been able to, in my view, give a good reason for why a kid can't transfer schools at least once without penalty, but a coach can get up and leave and break a contract and go to another school. There has never, in my view, been a good answer to that question. And so the NCAA has kind of kicked the ball down the road on that a little bit. That's not going to happen. It's going to happen, I think, at some point, but it's not going to happen soon. And I think that's kind of stinks right now, because you've got to think a lot of potential transfers coming up over the next 12 months or so because of coronavirus. And also, too, you've got the eligibility and the transfer exception for those seniors in spring sports who lost. Hey, sorry, my dog is scratching yourself here. You've got the transfer exceptions for the kids who lost their senior year of eligibility, and then you've got schools dealing with that. I mean, perfect example is Wisconsin. That's such a sticky situation up there. Their spring sports program is small, but you're still looking at a team at a school that said, "Hey, look, we don't have room for you to come back. We need you to move on." And yet these kids didn't have a senior year. So how can these kids go find a place to go somewhere, potentially as graduate transfers? Can they even find a school willing to that has room for them? I mean, this is just, with the way that the coronavirus had impacted college athletics, it made sense for the NCAA to really work and speed up this one-time transfer issue, make sure that it was in place for the upcoming season. But that being said, we all know that the NCAA doesn't necessarily move as quickly as we'd like them to.
Yeah, I think the coronavirus has definitely given the NCAA and other major organizations to get out and try new things, and I think that's good for sports in general. But moving on, you're a Missouri grad, and I feel like Missouri kind of followed the Kansas State of hiring a new face, as in Chris Kleiman. And how do you think it will work out with Missouri's coach?
If Eli Drinkwitz, that's a great question, and
Yep.
I think Missouri, you're shooting for fourth or third right now in this SEC East this year. Sean Robinson sat out last year, transferred from TCU. I think K-State fans are familiar with him. A guy who, when he was starting at TCU until he got hurt, had flashes where he just looked like one of the best quarterbacks in college football. Then he also had some flashes where you went, "Why did you make that throw? What are you doing?" And I thought that's natural for a young quarterback. So, you have to see how he'll do as a starter, and I think he's going to be the favorite to start this year. But Missouri's in that situation where they went for, I think, a guy who probably would have been easily the number one coach available in maybe 2021, 2022 in that hiring cycle, with another successful season at Appalachian State. But Missouri was in a position where they ended up with Drinkwitz because a lot of the names that were floated before Missouri settled on Eli Drinkwitz were, I think it's not unfair to say they were underwhelming to a large portion of Missouri's fan base. And, the 2019 season, I don't know if I'd necessarily want to go so far as to call it a disaster for Missouri, but this was a team that I thought had top 25 talent, could have potentially won 9 or 10 games with that schedule. And things just, Kelly Bryant gets injured, things just, the bowl ban happened. I mean, it was one of those spiral seasons. And if you're a Missouri fan, you can say, that's totally Mizzou, and it makes sense to you. Because this was going to be a Missouri team where, had they been eligible for a bowl, they were playing with the cloud over their head of, are they going to be eligible for the bowl, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a bad season. You came in that last game against Arkansas knowing you're not going to a bowl game if you win, and then Barry Odom gets fired, and Eli Drinkwitz, the saga ends, and he becomes Missouri's head coach. So, but they've got an easy schedule again this year relative to the rest of the SEC. So a bowl appearance should be the standard. Right now, this is a program, I think, a lot like Kansas State, where you should expect for 6 wins no matter what. And that's not to say 6-6 is good enough necessarily, but you should be very disappointed every season you don't go to a bowl game.
And then switching back to the Big 12, what's your analysis on the Big 12? I think it has potential to be a really good conference upcoming year with Oklahoma. I know they still have a really good quarterback, but he'll be in his first year playing. And then you got other teams like Texas, Oklahoma State, Kansas State. What's your kind of thoughts on the Big 12 coming up for this year?
I think it's Oklahoma's conference to lose again. And I think, there's a reason you're seeing Spencer Rattler be at the top of, or near the top of, a lot of Heisman betting odds, right behind Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, given what we saw Jalen Hurts do in the system after Kyler Murray and Baker Mayfield. Oklahoma, though, I think the biggest question for me is on their defense. We saw they made defensive strides in 2019, not clearly enough because, everybody got torched by LSU and Joe Brady. But this was still an Oklahoma defense that struggled at times to force turnovers last year. Still won the Big 12. But, is Texas finally in a position to challenge them? Texas, does lose a fair amount of talent. So I think Oklahoma is still right now probably head and shoulders over the rest of the league. But where it gets tricky, I think, is figuring out, even if you believe Texas is the number 2 team, is just like it's been in previous seasons, where do you slot teams 3 through 8, 3 through 9? I don't necessarily know. I think I could give you an order of teams today, and I'd probably change my mind 3 days later as to who I'd pick to go 1 through 10 in the conference. And that's, I think, the fun of the Big 12 is, you had a team last year like Baylor who, quite frankly, stunned everybody in being as good as they were. And then now you have Dave Aranda taking over in Waco. And I think Baylor's still going to be good, don't get me wrong, but you throw in the complete unknown, and this is the same thing for Missouri too, and basically anybody with a new head coach. It's an absolute complete unknown when you don't have spring practices, when you don't have chances to work with your team until the middle of summer. I think that there's going to be a first-year coach's learning curve here, and we could see Baylor, maybe be 7-5, and that may seem like a disappointment, but, at the same time, that could also be a successful season given the hurdles that Dave Aranda and his staff have had to jump through just to get to the start of the season.
Yeah, I think you're right, and good analysis on the Big 12. But I'll wrap it up with my final 3, just 3 questions. Give me 3 answers just on the top of your head. Anyways, how many wins does Missouri football get in the upcoming year?
I'm going to say 7. 7-5, a 1-win improvement.
Who is your national championship to the college football? We don't have to hold it to you. It's very early, but what's on your top of your head?
Okay, is it bad that I want to say Clemson, Alabama again, because I feel like it's going to be an unavoidable Clemson-Alabama playoff? I will say this, though. I'm starting to rethink the Clemson idea after Justin Ross's the revelation earlier this week that Justin Ross is out for the season with the congenital neck issue, and hopefully his football career could continue safely and he's healthy. But he was by far and away the best string receiver on that Clemson team. And I realize, you've got Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, still going to be a fantastic offense. But, right now, when you look at the guys that are coming back from Clemson at wide receiver, that is a huge, huge blow to the Clemson wide receiving core.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. Those are the two powerhouses in college football. And we'll end on this. What is your favorite barbecue place in Kansas City?
That's easy. Q39. I was gonna say, and I'm also saying this because before we recorded, a couple hours before we recorded, I had leftovers of the Joe's Minsky's pizza that's back for a limited time, and had to have it. Got it last night because we hadn't had it in over a year since it's back, and that may be my favorite pizza. So I'm gonna say Q39 for actual barbecue, but the Joe's Minsky's pizza is really pretty good.
Yeah, I need to try that. Well, thank you so much, Nick, and hope to have on you maybe later in the season or something like that, but we appreciate you. And tell us where you can find you on Twitter and all the other stuff.
At Nick Bromberg on Twitter, yahoosports.com, college football, NASCAR, anything and everything these days. And you know what? At least we got some sports back, and knock on wood, we'll have the NBA, NHL, baseball if they can get their act together, and then football season is crazily enough like 2.5 months away.
Thank you again for listening to this Sports Slate. Make sure to check us out on Twitter at sports_slate. That'll have links to everything: Spotify, iTunes, YouTube. So make sure to like and subscribe everything. I'd appreciate it.